They came to one quiet human world thinking it would kneel in fear. Instead, they woke something they were never meant to face. For 8,000 years, the dominion of 12 systems ruled the stars. Their banners flew over worlds so old that even their own people had forgotten how those empires first began. They had powerful fleets, ancient weapons, and one belief that guided everything they did: younger races existed to serve them. Humans were one of those younger races. When humanity first stepped into deep space, the Dominion looked at Earth with cold amusement. Humans were noisy, emotional, fast-growing, and dangerously creative. But to the Dominion, none of that mattered. They saw a species with small ships, fresh colonies, and no power to resist. So they offered humanity a choice that was not really a choice at all: obey or be crushed. For 20 years, Earth endured it. Resources were taken, trade was controlled, human colonies were watched like prisoners. Any protest was punished, any rebellion disappeared without a trace. On the surface, humanity bowed its head and paid the cost of survival. But deep under cities, inside hidden shipyards, and in silent stations drifting beyond charted routes, Earth was building something in secret. Something born from shame, something fed by anger, something made for the day fear would finally end. That day came at the edge of known space, on a farming colony called Aurora Vale. It was a small human world with 3 million people. Families lived simple lives there. They grew food, raised children, taught in schools, healed in clinics, and believed distance from the core systems might buy them peace. It did not. The Dominion demanded tribute from Aurora Vale: ore, fuel, and labor quotas the colony could never meet. When the Colony Council refused, the order reached the Archon throne of Archon Zevrak, an old ruler known for making examples out of the weak. He did not argue, he did not negotiate. He sent a fleet. 400 warships from 12 alien powers crossed the void and dropped into orbit above Aurora Vale. Their shadows covered oceans, their engines lit the sky like burning wounds. To the people below, it looked as if night itself had arrived early. At the center of that fleet stood the flagship Iron Verdict, commanded by Admiral Threx Malor, a veteran who had broken rebellions on 7 worlds. He believed this mission would be routine: a quick threat, a public surrender, a lesson for every human colony watching. His message to the surface was simple: submit now, or your world burns. But before Aurora Vale could answer, another signal cut across every channel. It came from Earth. It was short enough to fit inside one breath. Leave now. You have 72 hours. This is your only warning. On the bridge of the Iron Verdict, laughter spread among the officers. One human ship was coming, just one. Admiral Malor read the message twice, then smiled with cruel disbelief. The Dominion knew Earth's military numbers. Human fleets were small. Their strongest vessel was said to be an unfinished experiment, more rumor than threat. So the Dominion stayed. 72 hours passed. Then space tore open. A massive black warship slid out of faster-than-light drift, like a storm rising from the grave. Every Dominion sensor screamed at once. Alarms flashed. Targeting systems failed. For the first time in centuries, Admiral Malor forgot to breathe. On the hull of the human ship was a single name: Stormbreaker. And on its bridge, Captain Mara Vance stood calm, cold, and ready. The war had not started with the first shot. It had started with that warming. The Dominion still believed numbers would save them. In the next part, Admiral Malor learns what humanity built while pretending to obey.
Captain Mara Vance did not blink as the Dominion fleet turned toward her. On the main screen of the Stormbreaker, 400 enemy ships waited in a wide circle around Aurora Vale. Cruisers, carriers, siege platforms, missile barges, and command vessels. Enough firepower to erase a planet. But Mara's voice stayed calm. Open a channel. A young officer at comms looked back. To the whole fleet, Captain? Mara nodded once. All of them. A second later, her image appeared on every Dominion bridge. She stood in a dark command deck, lit by cold blue panels. No medals, no grand speech, no fear in her face. You were warned. Leave orbit now. Admiral Threx Maller stared at her image from the bridge of the Iron Verdict. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer to the screen. One ship? He asked, almost amused. Earth sends one ship to challenge the Dominion? Mara gave him nothing. Not challenge. End. The signal cut. Silence fell across the Stormbreaker's bridge. Then the enemy opened fire. Thousands of bright lines ripped across space. Heavy plasma rounds, rail lances, swarm missiles, disruptor waves. The black around Aurora Vale turned white with heat. On the colony surface, families hiding in shelters saw the sky flash like a second sun. But the Stormbreaker did not move, not at first. The first storm of fire hit its hull and bent away. Gasps spread across the Dominion channels. Energy bursts twisted off course. Missiles lost lock and slammed into empty space. Rail slugs shattered against a field no sensor could fully read. Gravity shield stable, said Stormbreaker's tactical officer. Power draw? Within combat range. Mara finally gave the next order. Advance. The giant ship moved forward, slowly, confidently, as if the enemy fleet in front of it was not a threat, but a wall already falling apart. Admiral Maller's smile vanished. All batteries, continuous fire, focus on their bow, break that shield. His fleet obeyed at once. Formation lines tightened. Dozens of capital ships shifted into attack position. The void shook with another wave of fire. Still, the human ship kept coming. Then, the Stormbreaker fired back. Not with missiles, not with plasma. From beneath its forward hull, 3 narrow points of pale light appeared for less than a second. That was all. Across the battlefield, 3 Dominion destroyers simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris cloud, just sudden emptiness, as if those ships had been erased from reality. The silence after that was worse than the weapons fire. What did they use? Whispered one alien officer aboard the Iron Verdict. No one answered. Mara watched the enemy line break in small ways first. A cruiser drifting out of formation, a carrier turning too early, fear moving faster than orders. Target their command relays, she said. Cripple coordination, leave their flagship alive. Her weapons chief looked up. You want Maller to watch? Yes. The next volley crossed space. Relay ship, gone. Sensor frigate, gone. Missile command barge, split open from the center. Now panic spread for real. Dominion ships began shouting over each other on open channels. Collision warnings screamed. Escort wings scattered. And for the first time in the history of Aurora Vale, the invaders above it looked unsure. Admiral Maller gripped the edge of his command rail so hard, his claws left marks in the metal. This was no unfinished human experiment. This was a weapon Earth had hidden for 20 years, and it arrived angry. Mara Vance leaned forward in her chair, eyes fixed on the flagship. Now, she said softly, we teach them why humanity stayed quiet. The Dominion came to crush one colony, but in the next part, Mara makes sure their entire empire, feels the first real taste of human war.
Mara Vance did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Begin Phase 2. The order moved across the bridge of the Stormbreaker like a cold wind. Officers answered with short, steady voices. No panic, no wasted motion. Everyone on that ship knew this moment had been planned long before the Dominion ever reached Aurora Vale. On the main screen, the enemy fleet was already losing shape. Their lines had broken. Their command relays were burning. Ships that had entered orbit in perfect formation were now drifting apart like frightened animals. But Mara was not interested in frightening them. She wanted them broken. "Launch the Warden wings," she said. Beneath the massive human warship, armored bays opened one after another. From the dark inside them came dozens of smaller craft, sharp black strike fighters with no lights on their hulls. They shot into space in complete silence, moving so fast they looked like tears in the stars. Admiral Threx Maller saw them too late. "Track those fighters," he barked. "Destroy them before they reach—" His words stopped when the first Dominion cruiser went dark. Not destroyed, dark. Its engines died, weapons failed, shields collapsed. In seconds, the huge ship became a dead shell floating helplessly in orbit. Then another vessel lost power, then another. Maller stared at the battle feed, confused and angry. "What are they doing?" A systems officer turned toward him, horror clear in his eyes. "They are not attacking our hulls, Admiral. They are cutting into our cores. Precision EMP lances. They are shutting our ships down." Maller felt something old and unfamiliar rise inside him. Fear. Earth had not built a fleet meant only to kill. It had built a fleet meant to choose. Destroy one ship, spare another, cripple one line, blind another. Every move was sharp. Every strike was controlled. Humanity was not swinging in rage. Humanity was operating like a surgeon with a blade at the throat of an empire. On Aurora Vale below, the people in the shelters saw it happening above them. For the first time since the fleet arrived, the sky was changing. The enemy fire was slowing. Burning wrecks were no longer falling toward the colony. The hands covering children's eyes began to tremble less. In one underground shelter, a little boy looked up at the ceiling as distant thunder rolled through the ground. "Is it over?" he asked. His mother held him tighter. "Not yet," she whispered. Above them, she was right, because Admiral Maller was not done. His face hardened. "Signal all remaining heavy carriers. Deploy siege drones. Ignore the human ship. Burn the colony." A shocked silence spread across his bridge. Even some of his own officers turned to him. "Admiral," one said carefully, "our war doctrine forbids." "I gave an order." The carriers obeyed. From the broken Dominion lines, thousands of siege drones poured into space like a black storm. Small, fast, and armed for one purpose only: planetary killing. They turned away from the Stormbreaker and dove toward Aurora Vale. For the first time, Mara's calm shifted, not to panic, to fury. Her jaw tightened, her eyes sharpened. She rose from her chair. "Helm, intercept pattern Delta." The officer looked back once. "Captain, that puts us directly between the drones and the colony." "I know. Tactical estimates 87% shield overload." Mara's answer came like steel. "Then we hold for the remaining 13. The Stormbreaker turned, and every soul on board understood the truth in that moment. This was no longer just a battle. It was a promise. The Dominion has chosen to strike the people below, and in the next part, Mara makes a choice that could save the colony or destroy the Stormbreaker forever.
The Stormbreaker turned hard across the black, and every alarm on the ship came alive at once. Red lights flashed over the bridge. Warning tones beat through the deck. On the main screen, Thousands of Dominion siege drones were falling toward Aurora Vale in a dark wave, fast and merciless, their small engines burning like red scars in space. Captain Mara Vance did not sit back down. "Bring us in front of them," she said. Her helmsman swallowed. "Full burn?" "Full burn." The giant warship surged forward. For one terrible moment, it looked impossible. The drones were already descending. There were too many of them, too wide a spread, too much distance to cover. Even on the surface, people in emergency shelters could see the glowing swarm tearing through the clouds above. Mothers held children close. Old men bowed their heads. Medics stopped pretending the wounded could not hear the fear in their voices. Everyone on Aurora Vale understood the same thing. If those drones reached the ground, the colony would die. On the bridge of the Iron Verdict, Admiral Threx Malor watched with burning eyes. He had lost control of the battle, but not of the outcome. Not yet. "Let the human ship chase ghosts," he said coldly. "They cannot stop all of them." But on the Stormbreaker, Mara had already made her choice. "Open the forward shield array to maximum arc," she ordered. Her helmsman looked stunned. "Captain, the strain will tear through the primary grid." "Do it! Reactor feedback could spread to half the ship. Do it now." The order was carried out. Ahead of the Stormbreaker, space itself seemed to bend. A vast curved shield flared into life, pale blue at first, then white-hot, stretching wide across the path of the falling drones. It looked less like a barrier and more like a wall made of frozen lightning. Then the first drones hit it. The sky exploded. One after another, the siege drones slammed into the shield in blinding flashes. Fire rolled across the barrier. Shockwaves hammered the hull. Every deck on the ship shook so hard that crew members grabbed consoles to stay standing. Some were thrown to the floor. A coolant line burst on level 9. 2 gunners lost power to their stations. Smoke rose from overloaded panels. "Shield integrity falling," shouted the tactical officer. 91%, 87, 84. "Keep it up," Mara said. Outside, the drones kept coming. Dozens, hundreds, then streams so thick they looked like rain made of metal and hate. Each impact lit the void brighter. Each second felt longer than the last. On the colony below, children looked up through bunker screens and saw a human ship standing between them and death. Not attacking, not retreating, holding. A young teacher in one shelter began to cry without even realizing it. She covered her mouth with both hands as the image shook above them. "They came for us," she whispered. Back on the bridge, another warning blared. "Captain," engineering called over comms, "forward shield grid is reaching critical overload. If we keep this up much longer, the bow section will melt." Mara's eyes stayed on the screen. How many drones left? Too many. That answer hung in the air like a knife. Then a new voice broke across the bridge from weapons control. "Captain, I have an idea." Mara turned. Lieutenant Elias Wren stood at his station, pale, sweating and breathing hard. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. "We cannot block all of them," he said, "but we can pull them." The bridge went silent. Mara took one step toward him. "What do you mean?" Elias looked at the tactical map, then back at her. "I can make every drone in that swarm think we are the planet." And for the first time since the battle began, even Mara Vance looked surprised. A desperate plan has just appeared in the middle of chaos. But in the next part, one wrong move could turn the Stormbreaker into a burning grave.
For 1 second, nobody on the bridge moved. Captain Mara Vance looked at Lieutenant Elias Wren, trying to measure whether he was desperate, brilliant, or both. Around them, the Stormbreaker shook again as another wave of siege drones slammed into the forward shield. Sparks jumped from a cracked console. Smoke curled from a ruined circuit board near the navigation rail. Somewhere below deck, metal screamed under pressure. Elias pointed at the tactical display with a trembling hand. "The drones are using planetary lock patterns," he said fast. "Heat, gravity, magnetic pull, atmospheric mass. They are not just aiming at the surface, they are hunting for a world. If I can flood space in front of us with false signatures, strong enough and wide enough, I can make them think the Stormbreaker is Aurora Vale." The tactical officer stared at him. "That would pull the whole swarm onto us." Elias gave a weak, humorless smile. "That is the point." Another impact rolled through the ship. The lights flickered. "Captain," engineering shouted through comms, "shield grid at 68%. We are running out of time." Mara never took her eyes off Elias. "Can you do it?" He hesitated. That one small pause told the truth more clearly than any speech. "Maybe," he said. Not yes, not no, maybe. On any other day, in any other battle, that would not have been enough. But below them, 3 million people were waiting under the shadow of falling death. Mara turned to the bridge crew. "Clear a path to his station. Give him everything he needs." Then she looked back at Elias. "You get one chance." He nodded and ran. He dropped into the systems pit beside electronic warfare, fingers flying over 2 screens at once. He was young, brilliant, and half the senior officers still thought of him as a quiet mind, better suited for simulation rooms than battle decks. But now his face had changed. Fear was still there, but something stronger was rising through it. Purpose. Redirecting sensor ghosts, pulling power from non-essential systems. "Careful," someone snapped. "You are draining life support buffers on decks 11 through 14. "I know!" Mara stepped to the center screen as data streams flooded across it. Lines of code, false mass readings, thermal blooms, electromagnetic echoes layered over one another until the numbers stopped looking like a ship and started looking like a planet wearing a human face. Outside, the shield continued to burn. Then Elias hit the final command. For one awful heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the storm swarm shifted. Not a few of them, all of them. Thousands of red points turned in space at once. A wave of breath left the bridge. "They're tracking us," whispered the tactical officer. The siege drones broke away from Aurora Vale and curved toward the Stormbreaker like a storm suddenly given new hunger. Cheers almost began, but Mara raised one hand. "Do not celebrate yet," she said, because the drones were no longer falling toward the colony. Now they were racing straight at her ship. On the surface below, the sky above the shelters changed. The red rain that had been diving toward the planet bent away, curving upward around the black shape of the human warship. People stared in silence. A child pointed at the sky. The teacher who had cried before now whispered through shaking lips, "They took it from us. They took the fire." On the bridge of the Iron Verdict, Admiral Threx Maller stepped forward in disbelief. "No," he said softly, "no species does this." But humanity did. And as the full swarm turned toward the Stormbreaker, Mara Vance gave her next order with ice in her voice. "Drop the shield." Every head on the bridge snapped toward her. The colony is safe for one breath, but in the next part, Mara's shocking command could either destroy the swarm in one move or kill everyone on her ship. "Drop the shield." For half a second, nobody moved. Then the order hit the bridge like a blast of cold air. The tactical officer turned so fast his chair nearly tipped. "Captain, if we drop the shield now, the swarm will hit us in less than 12 seconds. "I know," Mara said. "Then we need another command." "You already have it." Her voice did not rise.
It did not shake. That was what made it worse. She sounded completely certain, and that certainty forced the whole bridge to move. "Shield array disengaging," Tactical said at last, his hands flying over the controls. Outside the Stormbreaker, the great wall of light in front of the ship vanished. The void went black again, and the siege drones came screaming in. Thousands of them. Without the shield, they looked even worse, small burning knives diving through space, each one carrying enough force to tear open cities. They were no longer chasing Aurora Vale. Now they wanted the human ship. On the lower decks, crew members grabbed rails and held their breath. Some whispered prayers, some said nothing at all. On Aurora Vale below, millions watched through bunker screens as the only ship standing between them and death appeared to open its chest to the attack. Even Admiral Threx Maller on the Iron Verdict leaned forward. He could not believe what he was seeing. "Has the human captain gone mad?" one officer asked. Maller did not answer, because Captain Mara Vance was not mad. She was counting. "Range," she asked. 10 seconds. Good. She turned toward Lieutenant Elias Wren, still locked over his station, sweat running down the side of his face. "Is the false planetary signal stable?" "Barely," Elias said. "If I push any harder, the whole grid may collapse." "Hold it." He swallowed. "Yes, Captain." "Range." 8 seconds. Mara's eyes moved to weapons control. "Prime the ArcNet." A stunned silence followed. Then the weapons chief stared at her. "Captain, the ArcNet is still experimental." "It works. We have never fired it this close. Then today will be the first." The weapons chief hesitated only 1 second more. Priming ArcNet. Deep inside the hull of the Stormbreaker, hidden emitters woke up one by one. Energy built through the ship in a low rising pulse that everyone could feel in their teeth and bones. The drones kept coming. 5 seconds. On the main screen, the swarm had become a wall of fire. 4. Mara did not blink. 3. The bridge lights dimmed as power poured into the weapon. 2. Elias gritted his teeth. Signal failing. Hold. 1. Mara lifted one hand. Fire. The Stormbreaker exploded with light, not outward in one beam, but in a vast web. Lines of white energy burst from the ship in every direction, crossing and connecting, spreading through space like a giant electric trap. The first rank of siege drones hit it and vanished in sparks. The second rank slammed into the burning grid and detonated. Then the third and the fourth and the fifth. In less than 2 heartbeats, the swarm became a chain reaction of fire. The black above Aurora Vale turned into a storm of white flashes. The ship shook so hard that 2 officers hit the deck. Alarms screamed. A panel near navigation burst apart. Elias was thrown sideways against his console with a cry. But the ArcNet held for one brutal moment more, and that was enough. When the light finally died, the drones were gone. Not scattered, not damaged, gone. On every screen across the battlefield, only drifting ash and broken metal remained. No one spoke. Then a cracked voice came from engineering. "Captain, the ArcNet burned through half our outer relays. Bow armor is split. Reactor heat is climbing." Mara slowly lowered her hand. "We are still here," she said. But on the Iron Verdict, Admiral Maller's face had gone cold in a new way. Not fear, decision. He said, "Prepare my personal guard." One of his officers froze. "Admiral?" Maller kept his eyes on the Stormbreaker. "If I cannot break that ship from a distance, I will carve its heart out myself." The swarm is gone, but in the next part, the man who led this invasion makes his most dangerous move yet, and this battle is about to become personal.
Admiral Threx Maller did not waste another second. "Launch the breach escorts," he ordered. "Target their damaged bow. cut through their hull and take the bridge. The officers around him moved fast, but not with confidence anymore. Fear was already on every face. They had seen fleets erased, command lines shattered, and a storm of siege drones burned out of the sky. No one believed this would be easy. But Mailer did not care. He was done with distance, done with formations, done with pretending this was still a clean military action. If the Stormbreaker could not be broken from the outside, he would rip it apart from within. Across the void, small assault craft launched from the Iron Verdict and the few surviving escort carriers around it. Black armored pods, fast and narrow, built for one ugly job only: boarding. On the Stormbreaker, warding lights flashed again. "Captain," Tactical called out, "multiple breach craft inbound. Fast approach. They're ignoring our guns and heading straight for the bow scars." Mara Vance looked at the damage map. The ArcNet had saved Aurora Vale, but it had also torn open the forward armor in 3 places. The outer plating near decks 2 through 5 was cracked and hot, weak enough for a boarding strike. So this was Mailer's move. Good, Mara thought. Let him come. "Seal all inner bulkheads from the bow to command level," she said. "Evacuate non-combat crew from decks 1 through 6. Marines to breach points." A sharp voice from security answered at once. "Marine teams moving." Mara turned to Lieutenant Elias Wren. He was bruised, breathing hard, and still trying to steady one shaking hand after being thrown against his station. "You should be in medbay." Elias gave a tired smile. "And miss the part where they try to kill us up close? This is not a joke." "No," he said softly. "It really is not." For 1 second, Mara studied him. Then she nodded toward a side station. "Stay on internal systems. If they get into our network, blind them." "I can do that." Outside, the first enemy breach pod hit the Stormbreaker. The impact shook the ship. Then another hit, and another. Magnetic clamps locked on to the torn hull. Plasma cutters flared to life. On the security feed, bright circles of burning metal began to form on the outer plating. The enemy was cutting their way in. On deck 3, human Marines took position in a narrow corridor behind a sealed blast door. No speeches, no panic. They checked rifles, sealed helmets, and waited under red emergency lights. At the center of them stood Commander Soren Hale, broad-shouldered and calm, one hand resting on the grip of his pulse carbine. Over the comm, Mara's voice reached them. "Hale, here, Captain. You hold that line." "Yes, ma'am." A short pause followed. Then Mara said, "No one gets past you." Hale's answer came without hesitation. "No one will." The first blast door exploded inward. Smoke and sparks filled the corridor. Through the burning gap came towering armored figures from the Dominion personal guard, heavy and brutal, shields raised, blades in hand. Behind them, more boarders pushed forward through the smoke. Then the human Marines opened fire. The corridor became thunder. Pulse rounds slammed into armor. Alien shields burst in showers of light. The first attacker dropped, then the second, then the whole line crashed together in close, violent chaos. On the bridge, Mara watched the feed with cold eyes. Mailer had stepped on her ship. That meant one thing. Sooner or later, he would come for her. And this time, she would be waiting. The battle is no longer in space. In the next part, steel meets steel inside the Stormbreaker, and Admiral Mailer gets closer to the bridge than anyone thought possible. Commander Soren Hale did exactly what he promised. He held the line. The corridor outside the breached bow turned into a furnace of smoke, sparks, and gunfire. Human Marines stood shoulder to shoulder behind broken cover, firing in tight bursts as the Dominion Guard forced its way forward through the ruined blast door. The enemy came in heavy armor, tall and brutal, using their shields to push through the narrow hall. But the hall was the one mistake they could never fix.
There was no room for numbers, no room for pride, only room for the next step forward. And every step cost blood. "Left side!" Hale shouted. A Dominion trooper lunged through the smoke with a crackling blade. Hale fired once into its shield, twice into the chest, then slammed his shoulder into it as the body crashed into the wall. Another boarder came behind it. One of Hale's Marines went down with a cry, but even as he fell, he pulled the enemy with him and triggered a point-blank charge that blew both of them across the deck. The whole ship trembled again. On the bridge, Captain Mara Vance watched the internal feeds, while officers called damage reports all around her. Another breach pod had attached near Deck 4. Security teams were moving. Internal pressure was dropping in 2 sectors. Fire had spread through one maintenance shaft. Still, Mara did not flinch. "Status on Hale." A security officer checked the feed. "Still holding, but they are under severe pressure. Tell him reinforcements are 90 seconds out." The officer hesitated. "Captain, they are not." "I know," Mara said. "Tell him anyway." The message went through. Down in the corridor, Hale heard it in his ear and gave the smallest smile. He knew it was a lie, but it was the right one. "Did you hear that?" he shouted to his Marines. 90 seconds. That means we only have to survive 80. A few of them laughed, despite the fire around them. It was rough, tired laughter, but it was alive. Then the wall behind the enemy lines split apart, not from human fire, from a controlled blast. Hale's smile vanished. Through the torn smoke stepped Admiral Threx Malor. He was larger than any soldier around him, wrapped in black command armor scarred by old wars. A long energy blade burned in one hand, and in the other he carried a compact pulse cannon built for boarding actions. He did not rush. He walked forward with the cold confidence of someone who had spent his whole life watching other people die first. The Dominion Guard parted for him. Hale lifted his weapon. "So, the butcher finally came in person," he said, breathing hard. Malor's eyes narrowed. "Move!" Hale answered by firing. Malor's blade snapped up. The shot split against it in a flash of white. Then the Admiral moved faster than anyone in the corridor expected. He crossed the distance in a blur and drove into the human line like a falling hammer. The first Marine never even got a second shot. The second was thrown into the wall. Hale met him head-on. Their clash shook the corridor. On the bridge, Mara saw the feed change, saw her front line bending for the first time, and her voice turned to ice. "Seal every route behind Hale's position." An officer looked at her in shock. "Captain, our people are still there." Mara's eyes never left the screen. "Yes," she said quietly, "and Malor is not reaching this bridge." Hale now face to face with the man who came to break Earth. But in the next part, Mara makes a brutal choice that could save her ship by sacrificing her own people.
The order went out in one cold burst across the ship. "Seal every route behind Hale's position." On Deck 3, heavy blast doors began slamming shut one after another. Steel barriers dropped through the corridor network behind Commander Soren Hale and the Marines still fighting with him. Escape paths vanished. Reinforcement paths vanished too. They were cut off. One young Marine heard the sound of the final door locking behind them and looked back for half a second. That half second almost killed him. A Dominion guard slammed into him from the smoke, but Hale grabbed the attacker by the shoulder and fired into its side at point-blank range. The alien dropped hard. "Eyes front," Hale shouted. The Marine snapped back into the fight. He understood now. They had not been abandoned. They had been turned into a wall. On the bridge, one officer stared at Mara Vance in disbelief. "Captain, they are trapped." Mara's expression did not move. "No," she said quietly. "Malor is trapped with them." Then she opened a direct line to Deck 3. "Hale." The answer came through static and gunfire. "Still here."
I sealed the corridor net. Hale gave a short, rough laugh. Yeah, I noticed. A pulse blast thundered in the background. Metal screamed. Someone shouted for a medic. Then Hale came back on the line, breathing hard. You did the right thing, Captain. For the first time in several minutes, Mara's eyes lowered. Only for a moment. When she looked up again, the steel was back. Hold him there. I will. The line died. Down in the burning corridor, Admiral Threx Malor stepped over bodies and wrecked armor as if he were walking through broken furniture. His black blade hummed in one hand. Sparks slid across his armor where human shots had struck and failed to stop him. Hale wiped blood from his mouth and reset his grip on the rifle. Around him, the surviving Marines shifted tighter, pulling back from the first barricade to form a second line near the sealed inner gate. Smoke filled the hall so thick it blurred shapes. Fire alarms hammered the air. The deck was slick with coolant, blood, and fragments of melted metal. Malor stopped a few meters away. He looked at the sealed door behind Hale, then he looked back at the humans. A slow, cruel understanding moved across his face. She locked you in here, he said. Hale spat red onto the deck. She locked you in here. For the first time, some of the Dominion guards hesitated, not because of the joke, because the humans saying it still believed it. Malor raised his blade. You are already dead. Hale answered, maybe, but you are not getting past me. Then Malor charged. The corridor exploded into violence. Hale fired until his rifle clicked empty, threw it aside, and met the Admiral with a combat blade and armored shoulder. They crashed together so hard the wall dented beside them. Around them, Marines and Dominion guards fought at arm's length, too close now for clean shots, too desperate to slow down. On the bridge, Mara watched the feed shake and blur. Then Lieutenant Elias Wren's voice cut across the noise. Captain, I found something. He had one hand pressed against his bruised ribs and the other moving fast across a system screen. The sealed section around Hale. I can vent it. Silence hit the bridge. Mara turned toward him. Elias swallowed once. If we open the outer emergency locks, everything in that corridor gets pulled into space. No one spoke, because everyone understood what that meant. Mara has one terrible option left, but in the next part, she must decide whether saving the ship is worth the lives still fighting for her inside it. The bridge stayed silent after Elias spoke. If we open the outer emergency locks, everything in that corridor gets pulled into space. Captain Mara Vance did not answer right away. On the main screen, the internal feed from Deck 3 shook with smoke, sparks, and broken light. Human Marines were still fighting inside that sealed corridor. Commander Soren Hale was still in the middle of it, locked in close combat with Admiral Threx Malor. Steel hit steel. Pulse fire flashed and vanished. Every second looked like the last second anyone in that hallway would ever see. One officer whispered, Captain. Mara raised a hand. No more words. She opened a direct channel to Deck 3. Static cracked. Then Hale's voice came through, rough and tired. Hale here. Mara forced herself to speak clearly. We have a way to stop Malor. Hale did not ask what it was. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he heard it in her voice. How long? He asked. Elias looked at his screen. If I start the cycle now, 30 seconds. Mara closed her eyes for the shortest moment. Then she opened them again. Hale, I can vent your section. On the corridor feed, Hale froze for one breath. Around him, the battle still raged. A Marine fired from one knee. A Dominion guard slammed into the wall. Malor drove forward through smoke like a dark machine. But inside Mara's ear, everything went quiet. Then Hale laughed once. It was not happy. It was not bitter. It was the laugh of a man who finally saw the shape of the end. Well, he said softly, that is one way to make sure he does not reach you.
Mara's hand tightened around the rail in front of her. "I will find another option." "No, you will not." The words hit harder than shouting. Hale's breathing was heavy now, but his voice stayed steady. "You know that. I know that. If he breaks through here, more people die. Maybe the colony, maybe the ship, maybe all of us." A sharp cry sounded behind him. One of his Marines fell. Another dragged the wounded body back while firing one-handed into the smoke. Hale spoke again, faster now. "Listen to me, Captain. You brought us here to protect people, so let us do it." Mara said nothing. For the first time since the battle began, fear was not the hardest thing inside her. It was grief. Below them, Aurora Vale still lived because people on this ship had chosen pain over safety again and again. First the shield, then the ArcNet, now this. Hale's voice softened. "You always told us a captain carries the weight so the crew can keep fighting." He gave a weak breath that almost sounded like a smile. "Well, today let me carry some of it too." Mara looked at the feed. Hale turned his head slightly, as if he could see her through walls, cameras, smoke, and steel. Then he shouted to his Marines, "Fall back to the inner line, lock on to something." They obeyed at once. He had accepted it, not because he wanted to die, because he knew what mattered more. Mara's throat felt tight, but when she gave the order, her voice did not shake. "Elias," she said, "start the vent cycle." Elias swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain." Warning alarms changed across the ship. On deck 3, red emergency strips began flashing along the sealed walls. Pressure lock warnings filled the corridor. Malor stopped moving. For the first time, the Admiral looked uncertain. He understood, and then he roared. "The trap is closing on both commanders, but in the next part, Malor makes one savage move that could tear victory away in the final seconds." Malor roared and moved before the vent cycle could finish. He was fast before. Now he was desperate, and desperate enemies were always the most dangerous. The warning lights in the sealed corridor flashed harder. A cold, mechanical voice repeated the same message again and again. "Emergency decompression in 20 seconds. Emergency decompression in 19 seconds. Commander Soren Hale heard it clearly, but he did not look away from the Admiral in front of him. Neither man had much time left. That was exactly what made Malor so deadly. Instead of pulling back, the Admiral drove forward with brutal force, smashing one of his own wounded guards aside just to clear space. His black blade cut through the smoke in a sharp arc. Hale barely blocked it. The impact slammed him into the wall so hard his shoulder armor cracked. Malor did not stop. He hit Hale again, then again, each strike heavier than the last. He was no longer trying to win the corridor. He was trying to break one path through it. Straight to the inner gate. Straight to the bridge. "Hale!" one Marine shouted. Hale pushed back with everything left in his body, but Malor's strength was terrifying. The Admiral drove him down to one knee. The glowing blade stopped just inches from Hale's throat. Malor leaned closer, his voice low and full of hate. "You die here," he said, "and your captain dies next." Then he did something none of the humans expected. He threw his blade, not at Hale, at the inner control panel beside the sealed gate. The weapon buried itself deep in the metal housing. Sparks burst everywhere. The damaged panel exploded, and the inner gate shuddered halfway open before locking in place. On the bridge, Elias Wren went pale. "Elias, he hit the manual release line." Mara turned sharply. "Can he force the gate? Maybe not fully, but enough for one person to slip through if the frame breaks." On the corridor feed, Malor already understood it too. He slammed Hale aside and charged the half-damaged gate. The Marines opened fire. Pulse rounds struck his armor. One hit his leg. Another burned across his back. He staggered, but he did not fall. "Emergency decompression in 10 seconds."
Hale dragged himself up with blood on his face and launched after him. He hit Maelor from behind, just as the Admiral reached the twisted gate frame. Both of them crashed into the ruined opening. Metal bent, warning lights burst. Air screamed through the cracks now, pulling smoke and loose debris toward the outer hall. Maelor seized Hale by the throat and drove him into the gate. Too late, the Admiral snarled, but Hale looked back at him and smiled through the blood. "No," he said, "you are." Then Hale wrapped both arms around him and locked his grip. He was not trying to beat Maelor anymore. He was holding him in place. On the bridge, the final countdown hit Mara like a knife. 5 seconds. 4, 3. Maelor realized what Hale was doing. For the first time, real fear flashed across the Admiral's face. And then the outer locks blew open. The corridor has opened to space. But in the final part, Mara will learn who was lost, who survived, and what humanity does after making the galaxy's greatest empire bleed.
The outer locks blew open. Everything in the corridor tore toward space at once. Smoke, fire, broken steel, loose weapons, bodies, shattered armor, and pieces of the wall were all ripped into the black. The force was violent enough to bend metal and tear panels from the ceiling. Warning lights burst. Air screamed through the opening like the whole ship was crying out. On the bridge of the Stormbreaker, every eye was locked on the shaking feed from Deck 3. For 1 second, Commander Soren Hale and Admiral Threx Malor were still visible inside the storm of flying debris. Hale's arms were locked around Malor's frame. Malor fought like a wild beast, clawing, striking, trying to break free. Then the corridor feed went white. Signal lost. No one spoke, not even Captain Mara Vance. Below them, Aurora Vale was still alive. The sky above the colony was no longer filled with falling death. The remaining Dominion ships had started to break formation completely. Some were trying to flee, some were too damaged to move, some had gone dark and drifted in silence. Their great invasion had shattered. But victory did not feel loud on the bridge. It felt heavy. "Report," Mara said at last. Her voice was quiet, but every officer heard it. Elias Wren checked the internal systems with shaking fingers. Decompression stopped. Emergency doors sealed the breach. Pressure is returning through nearby sections. He swallowed hard before continuing. No sign of Malor's command signal. That alone told half the story. A security officer worked through the damaged feed, then looked up. "Captain, we found one life sign." Every face turned. "Where?" Mara asked. "Caught in an emergency maglock pocket just inside the secondary frame." The image cleared. A broken section of corridor appeared on the screen. Twisted steel, dead lights, frozen smoke crystals along the walls. And there, barely moving, was Commander Soren Hale, alive. A breath left the bridge all at once. Not relief, not fully. Something rougher, something close to pain and gratitude mixed together. Mara stepped closer to the screen. "Recovery team now." "They are already moving," security replied. There was still no sign of Malor. No armor mark, no life sign, no signal. Only open space beyond the torn hull. The Admiral who came to make an example of humanity had vanished into the dark. Hours later, with the battle over and the last Dominion ships surrendering or retreating, the people of Aurora Vale were allowed out of their shelters. They stepped into the light slowly. Parents carried children. Medics helped the weak. Farmers, teachers, workers, and old men looked up at the sky where the enemy fleet had once hung over them like a sentence. Now one ship remained above them. Black, scarred, damaged, still there. The Stormbreaker. On the bridge, Mara stood before an open channel to the colony and the surviving Dominion vessels beyond it. Her face was tired. Her voice was steady. "This world stands. Remember why. Humanity did not come for conquest. We came because you were going to burn the helpless. If you threaten our people again, this will not be a warning. It will be the end." No one laughed this time. No one answered at all, because now the galaxy understood the truth. Earth had stayed quiet for years, not because it was weak, but because it was waiting. And from that day on, whenever tyrants looked toward human worlds and saw kindness, they also remembered the thing hidden behind it. When humanity finally stands between the innocent and the fire, it does not move. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.